My name is Craig Morton. I'm the Assistant Provost here on the Metropolitan Campus. And it's my extreme pleasure to welcome all the faculty, staff, students, and members of the community to tonight's inaugural event of the 2011 UN Pathways Forums on the Metropolitan Campus. Early this afternoon, I was perusing the Office of Global Learning website, and I noticed that tonight's event is the 115th event sponsored by the Office of Global Learning since 2002. This includes events like tonight's events, video conferences, ambassador forums, and Fulbright lecture series. Our distinguished guest tonight, who Dr. Murphy will be introducing in a moment, is, by my calculations, the 85th person to present at a UN NGO Pathway Forum event here on between the two campuses. All these events are only part of our comprehensive UN and NGO-related programming at FTU, focused on providing experiential learning opportunities of global issues to our students who study at FTU campuses in 3 different countries, whether to be in the New Jersey campuses, at Roxton, or now at Vancouver. On a personal note, I feel very connected to these events, as their tenure kind of mirrors my own tenure here at the university. 8 years ago, when I started here at Fairleigh Dickinson University, actually in this building, the Office of Global Learning was still a child, so to speak, as an organization. I know there's probably a better word for that, but that's what comes to mind. And it's been a pleasure seeing the growth of the Office of Global Learning throughout the years. And as I was perusing the different speakers, I remember many of them, and they're very thought-provoking. And why is this important? It's important because it helps us operationalize our mission as being the leader in global education. It provides our students real-world experiential learning opportunities, whether it's here in this room or actually at the United Nations or at the different campuses throughout the country. So it's now my pleasure to introduce Dr. Murphy, who's the Director of Programs with Intergovernmental and Non-Governmental Organizations, who will in turn introduce our distinguished guest this evening. So thank you again for attending, and enjoy the evening. Thank you.
Due to traffic, you're not going to get my half-an-hour introduction of our guest speaker. I'm going to cut it short. You have his bio. You are aware of the exciting things that he's done in his life, Mr. Abramov. I would also like to introduce you to some of the important contributions he has made that were not indicated in his bio. He was very much involved in bringing together for the first time, under the aegis of the United Nations, direct talks between the Moroccan government and the Front Polisario to resolve the Western Sahara conflict. An interesting point about the Polisario Front is that the roots of its launch in 1979 began in 1971 with a group of Sahrawi students attending Moroccan universities. It sort of echoes what's going on now in the MENA region. He was also involved in drafting and negotiating Security Council Resolution 1325 in the year 2000 and serving as its final editor. Its focus is on women, peace, and security. It acknowledges the important role of women in preventing and resolving conflicts and in peace building. Thirdly, he was involved, very instrumental in doing preparing the first draft of the UN Secretary General's report, introducing the concept of UN Women in 2006. UN Women is a UN body created on the 2nd of July, 2010, to accelerate the achievement of gender equality and women's empowerment, merging 4 of the UN's agencies and offices previously charged with those responsibilities. The secret is now out, Andrei. It was you, a man, who laid the initial conceptual foundation for UN Women to emerge. Women worldwide should be very grateful to you. Also, you are indeed a ladies' man, in the very best possible way. So it is my great honor and pleasure to introduce to you our friend and our guest speaker for the evening, Mr. Andrei Abramov.
Thank you very much, John. I think it's overly generous introduction. Actually, the first draft of the first report of the Secretary General did not even reach the General Assembly. It went from the prints straight to the garbage bin. It was considered that this agency will never see the light of the day, and it's not needed, it's not necessary. So, well, a couple of years after, it saw the day of the light, and finally it became reality. Just to tell you very quickly that what I'm doing right now is basically dealing with NGOs. It's a big number of NGOs. We have more than 30,000 NGOs that we're dealing with, and we have 3,400 NGOs, which are NGOs in consultative status with ECOSOC. I will tell you more about this consultative status. But basically, on a daily basis, I think I meet with a good 50 or 30 NGOs on various issues. Some of them need to get to the UN building. Some of them want to be registered for some reasons. Others want to organize their own meetings. A lot of these NGOs are youth-related or student NGOs, actually. We had this year Yale University International Relations Association, which joined the United Nations in consultative status. Boston University is, Pennsylvania University is applying. I don't remember. I think there's 2 or 3 more which are applying for consultative status. But I think your university is the only one which has, the whole university has consultative status. Let me go back to today's program. I think that the theme, the voice of civil society at the United Nations, ideals, constraints, and potential, is very important right now. This year alone, over 16,000 NGOs attended UN meetings. And these 16,000 attended not just meetings, but also many of them, around 2,000 or 3,000, spoke at the United Nations. The best place, of course, is ECOSOC. ECOSOC has consultative status with NGOs, and the consultative status gives them the right to speak, present their views, and prepare the statements, oral and written, and basically participate in negotiations. That is definitely a big plus. From the big conferences this year, we had the Istanbul conference on the review of the program of action for the least developed countries in May 2011. And again, civil society was well represented there, over 2,000 NGOs and 500 NGOs, youth NGOs, basically, again, students, young people, and there was civil society forum, and there was youth forum, which I moderated in Istanbul. Very interesting, and the ideas that basically it's students, it's of your age probably, some of them even younger probably, with very good ideas and very good political sense of what is achievable, what should be done, and basically they fully aware that the world is running into quite a number of problems. From another angle, I would like to say that the General Assembly, you see, there is at the United Nations, I'm sure that you know that there is Security Council, there is General Assembly, and there is Economic and Social Council. The General Assembly and the Security Council, they do not provide for participation of NGOs. The Security Council has so-called an ARIA formula. ARIA formula is basically an ad hoc arrangement whereby the Security Council would listen to NGOs and interact with them, but basically it's only related to specific thematic debates. Thematic debates could be on women and peace, on civilians in armed conflicts, rule of law, and other issues, on themes. But the General Assembly has probably the least of the participation of NGOs, and there is practically no provisions for participation of NGOs unless they are invited by the President of the General Assembly. So recently, the General Assembly decided they will hold informal hearings of civil society, and 2 informal hearings in the private sector were held in 2011 on HIV/AIDS in April, and for the first time, non-communicable diseases. This is the diabetes, it's cancer, leukemia, the high blood pressure, hypertension. These are the types of, and interesting enough, there was more than 500 NGOs which came to participate in these hearings. Again, this year we had, for the first time, a summit on youth issues, and it was a very successful summit. The General Assembly decided, I think for the first time, I haven't seen it, that there should be an input from youth and youth organizations. And probably 2 or 3 weeks before the high-level meeting or summit, we issued a notice to all NGOs which are interested to submit their proposals. We received 94 proposals, 94 reports with proposals. Some of them made their way to the outcome document, although not all of them. But again, as I said, that the biggest following probably is commanded by ECOSOC and its functional commissions. 2 functional commissions are particularly important. This is Commission on the Status of Women, and before coming to this NGO branch that I'm in right now, I used to work in the Office of Special Advisor on Gender Issues and Advancement of Women, which provided substantive secretariat for the Commission on the Status of Women. Usually, the commission is heavily attended by NGOs. This year, we had 3,400 representatives of NGOs. If you mind the capacity of UN sort of building is approximately 600 to 700 people, so 3,400 representatives of NGO were overwhelming for delegations. Very also interesting, and I really sort of advise you to look at DPI NGO conference. This year, DPI NGO conference was in Bonn. Every year it moves from one place to another. I think last year it was in Melbourne in Australia. This year it's in Bonn in Germany. I don't know when it is going to be next year. And this is 4 or 4 days of meetings of NGOs on particular issues. This year it was on sustainable development. The numbers are very impressive because you can see it's probably around 16,000 people attended various meetings of the United Nations. But at the same time, it's not actually sort of the whole story. The whole story probably should go back to multilateral system and the current multilateral system, which is dominated by it's a world of sovereign states, and it's basically through their enlightened cooperation that we can see these sovereign states work together, and through this cooperation we must either sink or swim. These states are probably the most effective instruments that people have for the time being at their disposal in managing their affairs, no matter how they imperfect could be. Multilateralism is does not imply there is a world government. The United Nations cannot command governments to do anything. It's not even a set of supranational global institutions comparable probably to the world, to the European Union, or to some extent even to the African Union. What we have today at best is a community of the nations which share some values, face some common risks, and look for action to cope with challenges. States come together out of self-interest to increase the effectiveness of their national actions and policies for economic development, ecological management. For instance, the climate change. Basically, the climate change is governed by broader set of principles that one country has no right to inflict ecological damage on another state. It is a set of principles, however general, it makes it possible to look for a cooperative solution. And the states actually, in exercise of this self-interest, they agree that their sovereignty should be somewhat limited. And they would respect for the principles that reflect the common good. The same thing is happening in development area. The very idea of concessional assistance and specific targets for it, like Millennium Development Goals that I'm sure that you've heard of, it's actually place self-interest behind common development. And this is something that is very common, and every nation chooses to be member of these multilateral bodies and accepts the obligation to live by the rules of this community institution. These multilateral institutions, however, have no power that overrides the authority of the states that constitute these institutions. The United Nations are based on the principle that each nation state is the most legitimate expression of the political will. The relationships between nations can be governed by international law and human condition that could be improved by cooperative effort. I just want to say that it's sort of maybe a paradox, but the stronger is the state, the more pronounced is the shift in emphasis from the sovereignty of the princes to sovereignty of people. I think a strong government, strong state, does not imply this is an authoritarian one. On the contrary, this is a sign of weakness. A strong state is the one that reflects the views and interests of its citizens by allowing them free access to information, free expression of their opinions, and full say in decisions affecting their lives. Weak states, of those which virtually cease to function, are the ones that are most crippling impediments to effective governance at the international as well as national level. You can see this in Somalia, for instance, and in many other countries that emerged from conflicts. So basically, right now, we are finding ourselves in the midst of a major transformation that making today's multilateralism more inclusive and more participatory. This transformation is tremendously accelerated by globalization. These are economic, social, and cultural transactions, trade, finances, labor, cultural exchanges, information flows. And this transition is marked by several phenomena. First, the increasing number and scope of treaty obligations. As you can see, member states, they enter into various treaty obligations, and they willingly transfer the authority to some higher level bodies. For instance, WTO is subject to arbitration. For instance, the European Union is a supranational institution. African Union is also, to some extent, follows the same path. Second, over the past decade or so, UN-based multilateral processes have articulated a number of principles about the rights of individual persons that states are required to respect. The most obvious manifestation is the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and covenants that have emerged from it. Yet another manifestation is getting momentum, and this is the responsibility to protect. This responsibility to protect emphasizes the limits of sovereignty. The implications of that could be the sovereignty implies responsibilities as well as rights. To be sovereign means both to be responsible to one's own citizens and to the wider international community. In 2009, there was the first resolution ever of the General Assembly, which was adopted on the responsibility to protect. And all actions in Libya, for instance, there were legitimized by this resolution, as well as the other resolutions of the Security Council. Third, citizens expect from democracy much more than just opportunity to vote for a president or parliament. They want to engage directly with, through civil society organizations in the debates on issues that concern them directly. So traditional representative democracy is being supplemented by participative democracy. Fourth, the expansion and growing integration of the world economy have seen the emergence of multinational businesses with operations so dispersed that no single government can influence their global span. And finally, the emergence of advocacy and interest groups that bring together non-governmental organizations from various parts of the world on various issues, such as climate change, poverty eradication, gender equality, human rights, and this dramatically changes the role of nation states. Civil society contribute in three distinct ways. They act as advocates, disseminating views and information, and mobilizing public support for particular issues or causes. Second, they play an indispensable role in actual formulation of policy on major issues. Many ideas that are now found in national laws and international instruments first appeared in the form of proposals put forward by NGOs. And finally, they are very essential partners in operational sense. Increasingly, human rights, humanitarian and development assistance from donor countries is delivered by NGOs. As a result of these changes, the institutional basis of current multilateralism is changing. In the past, intergovernmental processes involved governments' discussion on various emerging issues. Right now, it's no longer. It is increasingly that civil society movement puts together a new issue on the global agenda. Next, a few like-minded governments are first amongst the peers to recognize the power of the case and start pressing for global action. Together with leading NGOs, they create social networks and social movements to build public and political support for global action. And you can see these campaigns like landmines, environment, population, HIV/AIDS, gender equality, women's empowerment, protection of children. In many ways, this interdependence is the bedrock of this multilateralism that is being changed. And I think it is not only changed, but it also is embedded and guided by broadly shared values and principles. Some of them are codified in the UN Charter, in human rights documents, policy frameworks, conventions, and agreements. And basically, we know all of them. This is the principles of freedom, equality, solidarity, tolerance, respect for nature, and shared responsibility. And this resulted in a set of internationally agreed development goals, including the Millennium Development Goals. So that is precisely because we have this change, and we also have, on the other hand, a system that is operated in an environment of persistent and growing inequalities between poor and rich countries, and the growth in economic and ecological interdependence and expansion of social and cultural context requires a much deeper form of cooperation than that has been attained so far. So, because the world is a community riven by large differences, the space occupied by civil society in multilateral institutions, particularly the UN, is of special value. Civil society should not be seen as threatening to governments. Civil society and governments play totally different roles, and one is not a substitute for another. Civil society is an arena for deliberations of policies, not decision-making. It focuses on specific causes, not overall political program. It presents a huge array of diverse interests, not an alternative governing blueprint. We still need a government to balance the competing demands and construct an overall policy. And the UN has been trying hard, I must tell, to include NGOs in the work. At certain levels, like programs and funds, probably they're much more successful, like UNDP, UNFPA, World Food Program, UNICEF is very also successful. And they include consultations with NGOs, not only consultation, but also implementation of various projects, policy advocacy, participation in capacity building, technical cooperation. Those who are privileged, like your university, who have always green sort of light to come to ECOSOC, and those who have consultative status. There are three types of consultative status. There is special, there is general, and there is roster. General is the highest. These organizations can even place items on the agenda of intergovernmental bodies. They can speak, they can prepare, they can make their written statements and oral statements, and they can participate in any meetings of ECOSOC. Article 71 of the Charter, United Nations Charter, says that the Economic and Social Council may make suitable arrangements for consultation with non-governmental organizations which are concerned with the matters of its competence. I just would like to emphasize consultations. It does not say that it should have, they should have a policy-making or decision-making role. The consultative status with ECOSOC is governed today by ECOSOC Resolution 1996/31, which outlines the eligibility criteria, rights and obligation of NGOs, procedures for withdrawal or suspension of consultative status. This is very sort of important resolution because it also gives the idea of how NGOs could participate in the UN, including in international, various international conferences. The commitment of member states to provide greater opportunity to NGOs are included in basically all documents, resolutions concerning various UN conferences, international conferences, and they also included in the Millennium Declaration, World 2005 World Summit Outcome Document, and MDG +10 Action Agenda. The relationships of civil society and the UN, and here I include everybody, programs, funds, specialized agency, departments, and offices. And they could be classified probably in four broad categories. First, at the policy and advocacy. Second, implementation and operational activities. Third, donor-recipient relationships. And fourth, transactional area. Policy and advocacy relationships can take many forms, including an institutionalized participation when civil society takes a direct part in the political process. One of the examples is International Labor Organization. International Labor Organization decision-making includes governments, includes employers, and includes unions, which are also non-governmental organizations. The Commission on Sustainable Development has also a multi-stakeholder approach, which includes 9 groups. I don't remember all of them, but the NGOs, industry, women, I think indigenous people, there's several. And these also participate in negotiation and decision making, and they can prepare their comments, their points on various documents for discussions. Second is accreditation or consultative status. This is when NGOs acquire formal status through officially defined criteria and procedure. This is, as I told you, Economic and Social Council consultative status. And finally, through policy dialogue, which is one issue specific engagement. For instance, there was Doha conference. There was on efficiency and on financial crisis. This is one-time conference, and yes, NGO participated, but since then this was not maintained as a partnership with NGOs. Second, operational activities are regulated by 2 modalities. There is a cooperation agreement modality. It could be either an agreement of memorandum of understanding and the partnership modality, which is a real recent phenomenon which includes, in most cases, civil society and the private sector and the United Nations. And it's very interesting new phenomenon because it permits to mobilize resources, and all 3 parties are basically sitting and discussing and agreeing on the ways to forward and plan every action. The donor and recipient relationship is most often reflected in funding either by the UN or by a major NGO, international NGO, for the activities carried by NGOs in support of humanitarian or development field. And the same applies to commercial relationships between UN entities and NGO, whereby a service or goods are just procured under a set of criteria and procedures, and there's no further transactions after this activity. In these relationships, each party wants to accomplish a set of goals and has different expectations and questions regarding NGO involvement. For NGOs, the main question is what impact can they make in the intergovernmental processes. The governments are very cautious and concerned with maintaining inviolability of intergovernmental prerogative to negotiate and make decisions. I must tell that domestically, civil society is regarded very highly as a facilitator of economic development, and it denotes the possibility of economic and social development activities on the basis of self-help. Civil society can complement or supplement the efforts of the state to achieve economic development. It also is a major producer of social services in developing countries. If you can imagine, up to 60% of education-related services in sub-Saharan Africa are provided by NGOs, and close to 40% of health-related services. You can see the impact of NGOs in real life. Thus, civil society helps directly or indirectly to create an effective material base for political development and is associated with democratic values and civic virtues such as tolerance and civic mindedness. NGOs' input has considerable information and analytic value. And this is something that even governments, which I try to keep NGOs at arm's length, they recognize. But just to tell you that the 1990s conferences, major conferences, and population and development, on sustainable development, on women, on social development, they had seen a huge expansion of participation of NGOs in the intergovernmental processes. Only in Rio in 1992, over 25,000 NGOs participated in the conference. In Beijing in 1995, close to 40,000 NGOs participated in the, and all these wonderful things like empowerment of women, gender mainstreaming, we owe to these NGOs. Basically, these major conferences, they set a certain level beyond which governments cannot go back. And I don't remember where I read, but basically on certain issues, there is a very clear understanding among member states that they should not compromise on the participation of NGOs. Of course, there are constraints. The question of giving more space to NGOs in the work of the General Assembly is gaining momentum. From various quarters, there is a huge problem of how to get NGOs to the Security Council, especially to its inner circle of permanent five. That is very complicated, and I think it will probably not solved in the short run. Those opposed to NGO participation are concerned with their strong and independent role that threatens the sovereignty of nation states. We have twice a year the Committee on Non-Governmental Organization. It's in the governmental body of 19 member states, and I was always puzzled because they do not look what contribution these NGOs could make. They look at the harm that these NGOs could potentially make to their governments, and this is really sort of very counterproductive in my view. But nevertheless, this is still considered to be a very valid point. From this perspective, the NGO participation is viewed as encroaching on government territory and breaching the boundaries of intergovernmental processes. Some member states question civil society involvement at the UN, as NGOs are not elected, and it is not easy to know whether they represent somebody or they have any constituency. But probably the most divisive issue is the parity of representation from developed and developing countries. There is a degree, this big disproportion in representation from developed countries vis-a-vis developing countries. Many NGOs from developing countries that argue that if the United Nations is serious about their equal representation, it should put resources to ensure that this parity exists. But again, the problem is member states. Member states basically feel that some NGOs in their countries owe more to developed countries, and they do not see them as representatives of their country, but representatives of the West. And they oppose very strongly to any UN funds being transferred to these NGOs. Another sort of sharpest, probably one of the sharpest issues is that governments do not feel that NGOs have any real impact on what is happening at the negotiating table. With regard to UN core functions of negotiated decision-making, NGOs are considered to be marginal players. They cannot themselves negotiate. That's something that is, but at the same time, they can make a very strong and direct impact on what is happening, although through a very circuitous route, and this is domestic arena. They close to population, they close to grassroots. They actually doing a lot of work. They can provide the bridge between decision making and realities in the developing countries. So this is why there is more and more interest of inviting these NGOs to speak on behalf of the local people. And I think we are very close, particularly right now as we are heading towards 2015 and the end of the period of Millennium Development Goals. And there is a realization on the part of the member states that governments themselves will not be able to accomplish these goals. The NGOs also, in their turn, they have their grievances, including there is a continuing gap between participation of civil society and in its impact on intergovernmental decisions. There is unpredictability of access to an inconsistency of rules of intergovernmental processes. Each conference is preceded by a resolution, an enabling resolution, and this enabling resolution is not a standard one. It again takes into account how much harm NGOs could make to particular governments, and this has been negotiated. For instance, we still have no enabling resolution for Rio+20, and the conference Rio+20 is around the corner in June. So we don't know which organizations would be allowed to participate. There is inability of member states and of the United Nations Secretariat to engage NGOs in systematic and ongoing manner. Everybody wants to see analytic and information materials from NGOs for a particular meeting, but after this, there is no follow-up and there is no systematic engagement. Next is paucity of resources and late notification of funding where it exists, especially for representatives from developing countries. I think also there is a repetition in terms of collecting the speakers, and we have practically the same speakers, and I'm guilty also myself because everything is done at the very last minute, and you basically have a set of speakers who are, you know, that they will deliver, and going and trying to find maybe a better speaker from a developing country is a very complicated issue, and getting the visas, getting the travel, and getting them to be on time is extremely complicated. I think these are the constraints. I personally believe that this status quo is not ideal, and it's probably not even sustainable in the long run, because the scale of challenges the world is facing with climate change, with various crises that we had, I think they should be addressed only by through coalitions that cut across states, the private sector, and civil society. These networks to address poverty and global issues will increasingly become a feature of the international architecture in a multipolar world. We see that member states are engaging NGOs in various ways, but due to absence of clear and coherent definitions of these relationships, modalities of interaction with each NGO is not well thought through, and relations with business community, civil society differ very dramatically. I think this is something that we really have to think about. The challenge is how we could sort of do these relationships more effective and probably more adapted to the current situation. First, I think we need to rethink multilateralism to mean multi-constituencies with civil society, with the private sector, bringing new issues to the global agenda, and with governments taking action through multi-stakeholder coalitions of governments, private sector, and NGOs. While respecting state sovereignties, new multilateralism is likely to be a flexible network, maximizing the strengths of interconnecting actors, public and private, profit-making, and NGOs. It could be an expanded formal arrangement with UN, civil society, based on inclusiveness, transparency, a clear division of labor, and enhanced effectiveness, accountability. It could be also self-regulating umbrella bodies dealing with NGOs, the private sector, academia, and other sectors, with its governing body for each of the key non-state actors. And that might be probably something that, as people, several analysts proposed, some kind of assembly of NGOs, assembly of private sector, assembly of academia, which will be institutionalized in the General Assembly or ECOSOC or other bodies. That might be also a practical modality to pursue. Second, I think we should realize the full power of partnerships. Multi-stakeholder partnerships have emerged as powerful ways of getting things done and closing the implementation gap by pooling the complementary capacities of various actors. The effectiveness of implementation will depend not only on governments, but also on the commitment of civil society, who has considerable influence in today's societies. We can achieve more in implementation if we could create effective synergies between governments, civil society, and private sector. The multi-stakeholder approach reflects the new pro-NGO international form, which puts pressure on the UN and other international organizations to include non-stakeholders in their social and economic work. Third, the outcome of the UN political process must be better linked with operational activities of NGOs and UN funds and programs. A closer connection is critically needed so that operational work contributes to the global goals and global deliberations are informed by local realities. The UN needs to give priority to enhancing its relationships with civil society at the country level. The UN system has experimented quite successfully with new partnerships, particularly in the context of pilot projects delivering as one. I think to relaunch the United Nations, the focus of new engagement and multilateralism that many heads of state pledged at this session of the General Assembly requires measures to create a broad civil society engagement with UN decision-making processes and structures. Such involvement could go a long way towards forming and preparing issue-oriented coalitions to demand and support such initiatives. I think I will probably stop here and wait for your questions. Thank you very much.
I have two questions, Mr. Abramov. What, if any, policy output do you expect in the Rio 20 conference in June of 2012?
You want me to respond to each question, or you want to? Okay.
No, that question.
Okay.
That question
Yeah.
first.
Okay. As you know, the Rio Plus 20 will be dealing with two basic issues: green economy, and we'll have the issue of how this green economy could be reflected in three dimensions, and this is economic, environment, and social. So these three sort of pillars of the document that and the outcome document, again, we are having big problems with the outcome document. It's the second preparatory committee was held recently, and unfortunately it did not result. We still have a zero draft, which means that this zero draft did not go through. It's not been negotiated because it was considered to be not satisfactory. We expect that there will be outcome document. We don't know yet whether it will be a declaration, but it will be definitely a negotiated document. Most likely it will be a declaration.
My other question is, approximately what percentage of DESA employees are U.S. citizens, and what effect, if any, does this have on DESA policy?
I'm not prepared to tell you exactly what percentage would be.
Okay, what portion?
I probably approximately, usually the overall, the Secretariat is recruited on the basis of sort of proportional proportional sort of recruitment, and this is basically corresponds more or less to the contribution of this country, and this is approximately 25%. So it's safe to assume that at least 25% of staff members in DESA are U.S. citizens. So
Thank you.
Please state your name.
Thank you for the presentation, Mr. Abramov. My name is Saeed, and I'm Guru Fairleigh Dickinson. My question was regarding the consultative or whatever status that the NGOs get from the UN, and it was directed to the NGOs that are not like international NGOs, but local NGOs, like let's say local NGOs from Africa, from Asia, mostly from developing countries. Because the policies that are made at the UN most likely affect those people in regions like Africa, Asia. So what is the percentage of NGOs from those countries, if there is any? Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. It's a good question. We have approximately 60% from these 3,400 NGOs. We have 67% of NGOs from developed countries, and the rest are from developing countries. Why it's so? Basically, first of all, lack of resources. Most of the accreditation systems are actually internet-based, so you have to have access to internet and the computer. So many NGOs in developing countries, they do not have this luxury of, and this is not something that you could do in 15 minutes. To complete application, you need at least 1 or 2, 3 days access to computer and internet. The cost of 1 month in sub-Saharan Africa is approximately $750 subscription to internet, so that you could imagine that it's not very cheap. What we're trying to do is basically we're working with delegations from these countries, and we organizing with them sort of briefing sessions. Somebody who is in this area for various reasons, attending some kind of ECOSOC related meeting, meets with NGOs and explains to them how to do their application, how to complete the application online. Again, this year we had approximately 400 and change applications, and they practically divided 50-50 from developing countries, from developed countries. So basically we can see, usually we had 80% from developed countries, 20% from developing countries. I think this year we had 50-50. Practically it's a good result. Definitely, as you can see, also we work with partners from international NGOs, big NGOs like Caritas, Care International, World Vision, Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, with representations in different countries or with organizations affiliated with these organizations. They also have sort of mini capacity building courses for NGOs, local NGOs, and they do a lot of sort of capacity building for them. And finally, we got into partnership with Department of Public Information, and Department of Public Information has United Nations information centers in many developing countries. They closed down all information centers in developed countries, and they kept the information centers in developing countries. They also promised, they have not done yet, but they promised that they will also do some capacity building for us. Thank you.
Good evening. Thank you for that very informative talk. My name is Christine Vitale. I work in career development. And I'm wondering about something that you had mentioned where governments view NGOs as an invasive and perhaps even a threat. They have an adversarial relationship. But then how, at the same time, can they say that NGOs have no impact and they're ineffective? Seems like a paradox.
Yeah. Thank you very much. I think this is what I always say. There is a paradox. On one hand, you see, most of the countries, governments, they realize that if they do not cooperate with NGOs, they will have in most of developing countries, they will probably have more or less repetition of what we see in the MENA area, in the Middle East and North Africa area. Even in the countries, look at the last years in London, in a raise of I think 50% of tuitions led to huge outbursts of students' unhappiness with the government. Of course, later on, the government went back and say, okay, you incur the loan, but once you sort of find a job, we'll write it off. So basically, I don't know why this sort of debt was invented in the first place, but who will pay it off if they will write it off at the end. But anyway, I think governments realize that if there is no cooperation with NGOs, there will be violence. This is definitely. At the same time, there is an ingrained sort of fear that NGOs will encroach on the decision making and on the process of in 2000. I don't remember 2003, John, if you correct me. Cardozo report very clearly said that NGOs. Cardozo was president of Brazil, and the previous Secretary General Kofi Annan appointed him to chair a panel of eminent persons to work on the report on the relationship between the United Nations and it's a very interesting report. I don't have the symbol, but I will send tomorrow to John the report. If you're interested, look at this because it deals with this issue very, very sort of extensively. And basically the point was that there is a realization on the part of member states that inputs from civil society absolutely necessary, cooperation absolutely necessary, but within certain limits. This issue of limits is the biggest issue. Some delegations saying that everything is within the limit. Others saying that the limits should be from here to here. And this is what we're trying to bridge between these two groups of countries. And I must tell you that countries, Latin America went all the way to those who do not oppose NGOs in any guise or any. African countries lifted a lot of their, some countries still remain, China, Russia, Pakistan, India to some extent. India less, but still has some opposition to this idea of decision making. But basically, again, civil society recognizes fully that governments there is no misunderstanding and there is no sort of attempts from the civil society side even to sort of replace governments or make decisions. It's they realize that, I mean, if I represent the Women's Human Rights Association, I have nothing to negotiate with some governments. I just expose my side of the story, and this is basically, that's it. If it helps in decision making, it helps. If it does not help in decision making, I would rather try to push for this point of view. But again, I cannot sit with the government of Pakistan and try to negotiate this. It's not the role of civil society. Thank you.
We have one last question.
Good evening. My name is O'Sheen. I'm actually a student here at 30 Seconds University. First, I wanted to thank you for working so hard for women equality. My question is also based on that. I wanted to know what DESA and how it is promoting women empowerment in developing countries and how much progress have you guys made?
Thank you. Well, Department of Economic and Social Affairs, John said that this new UN Women entity, it included all four previously existing gender-related units. One of them was my former Office of Special Advisor on Gender Issue Advancement of Women, which it was part of DESA. It was part of the Office of the Secretary General, but administratively related to DESA. This was the office which was dealing with women and peace, gender mainstreaming, system-wide coordination, gender balance in the UN system, and violence against women, including the Secretary General's campaign, Violence Against Women. The second office was Division for Advancement of Women. This is part of DESA. This division was providing services to Commission on the Status of Women, preparing analytical reports on the situation of women in the world, There was also a human rights component, which was servicing the CEDAW committee. And finally, it had a technical cooperation. Technical cooperation mostly dealt with empowerment of women, poverty eradication, computers, the computer literacy, various job-related skills, education, and preparation of expert group meetings on various issues which are dealt by the Commission on the Status of Women. Then comes UNIFEM. UNIFEM was part of United Nations Development Program, and it was only devoted to field operations. Field operations in terms of providing women with, there was a trust fund on violence against women, paying NGOs which are working on the issues of battered women, homes for shelters, education of girls. There was also a big program of women in decision making. And I don't remember right now, there was 3 or 4 areas where they had been very active. And INSTRO, education branch. Well, speaking too much today. Sorry. It finally was INSTRO. INSTRO was research and research institute and training institute, and it had practically no major activities because its funds were depleted. Sorry. I've been speaking today from 9 o'clock. We had meetings and we had a couple of NGOs coming, and I really had to brief them on various issues. Thank you.
On behalf of the Office of Global Learning, we would like to thank Mr. Andrei Abramov and present him with a token of our appreciation. And thank you everybody for attending this event, and thank you Dr. Murphy, Dr. Scorza, and Mr. Craig Morin. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you.